Yeah, let's go. You gotta love that song, right? It has the feel of what we're talking about in this series, a feel of power. And I know that there's people in here, we're all over the spiritual spectrum. Some of us are all in, and we're like, every word of that song, that's the God we believe in. And other of us are like, I've never seen that God before. I'm not so sure he exists. And I just want you to know, no matter who you are and how you walked in this place or tuned into this video, you can end this experience different. Because see, that God of power doesn't just hold on to it for himself. That would be reasonable. That would be okay. But that God of power says that we, you and I, can have access to the same power. Let me read you from Ephesians 1. It says, I pray that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, in his incomparably great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty power that he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms. That's the power. And the point of today, the point of this series that we're in, is that you and I can tap into that power in our lives and see it in its fullness. Now, one of the greatest displays of power I've ever witnessed in my life was on a 4th of July a number of years ago. No, it was not the fireworks. I know that's what you would assume, not the fireworks. It was actually earlier in the day. A friend of mine came over, and just to protect his anonymity for the purpose of this story, because you might judge us later on, and I don't want him to receive that. We're just going to call him G. McElfresh, which that might be too obvious. Let's go Greg M. So me and Greg M, we were hanging out. His plan was just like spend 4th of July together, families, get everybody together, do the classic stuff, tubed meat, ice cold beers, fireworks at night. But when he got to my house, he said, hey man, I got something we could light up before the fireworks. And it's not what you're thinking. It's a stick of dynamite. An actual stick of dynamite. And, we were responsible adults, right? And by the way, let me just say too, you guys are already judging us. I want you to know, this was a long time ago, okay? We were much younger, much stupider. This is like 2022 probably. Like, we've grown a lot, so just relax, And we just kind of thought, we're like, what should we do with this? And we did what any responsible American male would do. We made a plan to blow up a bucket. We were like, if we could put this under a Home Depot bucket, maybe the Home Depot bucket could go to the moon like Apollo 11. This is worth a shot. And I know some of you are like, okay, did you really do this? And did you think this through? Did you wear eye protection? Did you have ear protection? Did you clear out the grass so you wouldn't burn your yard up? Did you call your local county to see if you needed a permit and before you detonated something? Kyle, did you check the statute of limitations with said county before you started telling us this story to make sure you're not incriminating yourself? The answer to all of this is no, we did not. We did none of those things. We put it out in a field in front of my house, put the bucket over it, lit the fuse, and then we ran. Just ran. Because, what's going to happen when dynamite blows up? I don't know. I've never seen it before. So we hunker down, we run far, we hunker down, and then we just wait. And we wait, and we wait. In the moment where we're pretty sure the fuse isn't maybe lit, the whole thing goes boom, explodes. And it was awesome. Now, if you've never seen this before, let me tell you what happens. The bucket did not go up. The bucket went apart in about 1 million pieces. It was a solid 10 minutes of bucket shrapnel just raining down from the heavens on this field. There was a 3-foot crater. It's smoking where there used to be grass. It was amazing. Amazing. Oh, let me just say, there's probably a parent here, you brought your kid, and I'm sorry, you did kids club or middle school or whatever. So let me just speak to your parent, or your kid for a second. Kid, I'm Uncle Kyle, nice to meet you, and I want you to know what we did was terribly irresponsible. It was horribly awesome. And I just want to say, our legal team has asked me to make a disclaimer at this point. I am not a safety expert. I'm the same guy who cut my hand apart in a table saw, so don't do anything that I do that's dangerous. That's not what I'm here for. The point of all that is this. We love those big bursts of sudden power, don't we? Fireworks that shoot off, explosions that go off. We all love that, but none of us want a life that's like a stick of dynamite or a firework bursting in the sky, no matter what Katy Perry says. That's not what we're going for. See, a sudden burst of power has a name. It's called a flash in the pan. And a flash in the pan, unfortunately, describes too many of us in our life, in our faith, in our stick-to-itiveness. Too many of us, we have these moments where maybe we get baptized and it's amazing and everybody's celebrating and we're clapping and it feels incredible, and then a few months go by and something difficult happens or something disappointing and we start to wonder, was any of that real? We walk away. Too many of us, we start into a major at college. We have a thing that we feel called to, but it gets difficult, it gets hard, and we struggle, and we decide maybe it's time to quit, maybe too early. And in relationships, this happens over and over and over again. And the thing is, the world is pushing us in that direction. Because see, the world whispers when things get hard, it whispers, quit, stop. You don't have the power, and you probably won't. The best thing you can do is stop. Just stop. I know every single one of us have heard this voice in our lives. I know I've heard it. I've heard that voice in my marriage. We had 3 kids in 3 years. We were so tired and nasty to each other. There were absolutely moments where I know Sarah looked at me and went like, that guy? Really? Forever? I felt this in my work. I felt a calling into ministry. And yet there have been plenty of moments where I've been frustrated. I had the same job for 7 straight years. Do you really think I didn't have moments where I thought, I've been overlooked? No one sees my potential. I'm stuck. I had moments where I wanted to quit. I've had the same thing in my faith, the same moments that you have, moments where I've prayed and I've asked God, would you give me a miracle? Could I get a healing from you for my friend? And instead what I get is an invitation to a funeral. And you go, really? Is this it? And see, this is the thing that all of us will come up to. It's called the end of our own power. And in this moment, we have to decide what we're going to do. Now, the good news of today is that we're not talking in this series about the kind of power that's a sudden burst, the flash in the pan, and then nothing else. We're talking about the kind of power that only comes from God, the power to last. Has a name. It's called resilience. It's a character trait that only the Holy Spirit, only the Spirit of God can put inside of you. And the key to getting it is what you fix your eyes on. Before we go any further, I want to pray that God would give us access to that power today, and then we'll catch you up on where we are in the Bible. God, thank you so much for the folks who are here, who are listening, who are tuned in, who are at all of our sites. God, bless them. I pray that for all of us, me included, we would take a step closer to you and tap into the power to last. Amen. The old man knew that the end was coming for him. His eyes had been fixed on the moment for decades. It was an obsession. His friends thought it was a strange quirk, one they didn't quite understand. But the old man had this vision of the end coming. It was fixed in his mind from the moment he woke up. It was the last thing he thought of before he went to bed at night, the end getting closer and coming for him. And now he knew in a way that goes past knowing that the end would arrive soon. Now, this wasn't the place where he wanted to meet the end. It wasn't the script he would have written for his life, but he had given up on that delusion a long, long time ago. He looked up at the stone walls of his prison cell. The blocks were smooth, straight, unmistakably Roman, made of ashlar, a volcanic ash that had been compacted by pressure in time and turned from soft black snow floating down from the sky into something hard and unbreakable. The man smiled at the thought. closed his eyes and remembered the stone that he grew up with back home in the foothills of the great Taurus mountain range, basalt. Crushed sediment from ancient oceans long gone, something soft and decaying, turned by pressure and time into something impossibly strong, just like the walls of his prison cell, just like him. He didn't know if he'd meet the end today, tomorrow, or next week, but he knew the sound that would reach his ears long before his eyes caught a glimpse of the approaching shadow. It would be the faint clink of the keys hanging from the jailer's belt as he walked down the long hallway. The old man closed his eyes to listen. No keys, not yet. He supposed that meant he'd get to finish the letter, though. The letter he had begun this morning. It would be his last and a surprise to the world who followed his writing. Well, most of his letters had been addressed to cities, Ephesus, Corinth, Philippi, even Rome. The Athenians probably thought they would be next, and for good reason. But he had a more important letter to write to a young man he had met more than a decade before. A young man who needed that same vision that burned inside the old man, the vision of the end coming for him. Nothing was more important than that. Too many others had failed to find the vision. Too many of them had gone away like chaff carried off by the western wind. The old man turned back to his parchment, ink-stained fingers twirling the calamus pen until the words formed in his spirit, placed there by a power he knew no walls could contain. These were the words. He was sure of it. And so he began to write. As for you, always be sober-minded, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. He closed with a few personal instructions and greetings, put the pen down, rubbed his tired eyes, and stretched his cramped legs. That's when he heard it. The soft clinking of keys growing louder. The end was here. The old man grinned. He had made it. He had actually done it. The jailer placed a hand over his swinging keys to silence them and paused in the hallway, straining towards the old man's cell. Was that laughter? Now, that old man went by a Roman name. His name was Paul. And by the time he wrote that last letter inside of that jail cell, he was famous all over the known world. His letters had influenced tens of thousands of people and turned the known world upside down. That last letter, though, was no accident. He picked out a specific person to write it to, Timothy. Timothy he had met about a decade earlier in the city of Lystra in central Turkey. Timothy had been a convert after he heard Paul teach and had been called into ministry. For the last 4 years, at the point he got this letter, Timothy had been serving in the city of Ephesus, a coastal city in the northern Mediterranean Sea. And he was a young guy. He was probably late 20s, early 30s, tops, young guy at the beginning of his ministry. And Paul decided in this moment, at the beginning of his ministry, was the perfect time to focus Timothy's mind on the end. He said, fulfill your ministry. 2 Timothy 4:5. But you be watchful in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. Ministry is the good works that God's called you to. They're good works that God's called all of us to. It's not about being a professional Christian person. People like to say that I'm in ministry because I get paid to work at a church, but that's not what ministry means in the Bible. It's just the good works that God has prepared for you to do. And he's got them for all of us. Ephesians 2:10 says, for we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So why would Paul write a letter to a 20-something all about ending well? It's odd. Well, the reason is because Paul was surrounded by people who were not ending well. The same letter that he wrote, that letter in the jail cell, 2 Timothy, Paul names 7 people by name who he had done ministry with, who'd been part of the church with, and 6 of them did not end well. That's 1 out of 7 if you're counting at home. The stats today aren't much better than that. I saw a recent survey that said only 30% of people in full-time ministry will end well. I saw another one that matched it that said if you're raised inside of a family of faith, only 30% of those people will have their faith survive through adulthood. See, the fact is that few people do fulfill, and most don't. Most don't at all. And you and I, we have to reconcile with, we walk to in this moment is the understanding that we will be one or the other. We will be part of the few or part of the most. So a good question is, what's the dividing line? How do you get from one to the other? How would you become somebody who fulfills all the good work that God has prepared for you? Well, I believe that Paul's life uniquely holds the secret to it. Now, my impression of Paul, it was different. It was dramatically changed by a trip I took a number of years ago where I actually got to go to Turkey and Greece and walk in his footsteps from town to town and see these places and understand who he was. I always thought of him as like this egghead scholarly guy because he writes these really smart things. Romans is brilliant. It was studied at Harvard when they founded the university, not as a spiritual document, but as an example of incredible legal reasoning. The guy was brilliant. But if you only see an egghead, you miss out on Paul because that's not the most important thing to him. It's not the defining characteristic. He was born in Tarsus. It was a city in central Turkey. As a young man, he had a violent kind of run at it. He was a Pharisee. And when the Christians came on the scene and Jesus kind of upended everything, Paul decided it was his duty to stop them. And so he would literally go into towns, hunt down Christians, and execute them. One day he's on a road to Damascus. Maybe you've heard this story. Going to that city with letters in hand that would allow him to arrest and kill Christians. And on the way, a bright light shines out of the sky, knocks him off his horse. He gets blinded, and he hears a voice that says, "I am Jesus, Paul. Why are you persecuting me?" And immediately, Paul changes. He goes from this guy hunting Christians to a guy following Jesus. It says this in Acts 9:20. Immediately, he, that's Paul, preached the Christ in the synagogues that he's the Son of God. Paul has this immediate thing to him, this thing that just springs into action. He's got that burst of power that so many of us have in our life. He can resonate with that moment you first came to faith, or that moment you first fell in love, that initial like, yes, everything is awesome. He had the same exact thing. And just like many of us, he had the same thing that follows, which is always the immediate resistance. See, Paul wasn't received well. No one was like, great, that's awesome, Paul. Thanks for preaching to us. High fives. That's not what happened. Instead, the people in Damascus tried to kill him. And so he flees to Jerusalem. He gets in that city. He starts preaching the gospel. And the same thing happens there. Everyone wants to kill him. And so the disciples, fearing for his safety and for theirs, they actually send him in a bucket out a window, drop him out of the city wall, and say, you should go back to Tarsus. So Paul does. He goes back to Tarsus, his hometown. I don't know how long it had been since he had been there, many, many years. His family likely shunned him. They didn't believe what he believed anymore. If he had a wife, she would have abandoned him at this point. We don't know, but that's what would have happened. And so many scholars believe that Paul likely spent his time in Tarsus living as an outcast, utterly, completely alone. In fact, the friend who I went over with, the expert who toured me around in the life of Paul, said his belief is that Paul actually lived in a cave alone by himself for 8 years. Can you imagine that? What would you do if you took a step towards the thing that you wanted in your life, your career path, and then there was 8 years of stall? Would you have the power to wait? What if you got into a marriage and it was amazing in year 1 and then it stalled? Would you wait? What if you got into faith and it was amazing and it was incredible and then things just felt disappointing and strange and confusing? Could you have the stamina and the power to last? Well, the remarkable thing about Paul is that he did. He did last 8 years. See, resilient people have one defining characteristic that sets them apart from all others. They stay. You know, we have that saying, complete this sentence, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. They don't, though, actually. See, when the going gets tough, the powerful stay. They don't go anywhere. And Paul, his resilience, his patience, this power that he's tapped into, it pays off. Because after 8 years, his old buddy Barnabas comes to Tarsus and says, all right, Paul, we're ready for you. Come on back. If they go back and they do ministry, and everything is completely awesome after that. I mean, just smooth sailing for Paul. I'll read it to you out of Acts 4:04. It says, from there, Paul's life was full of lollipops and unicorns. Every day, he woke up to a double rainbow, and every night he laid his head down on a baby soft pillow of fully realized dreams. That's Paul. No, actually, 404, because that's not found. That's actually not in the Bible. It's not what it says at all. But it's what the illusion that we have of what it should be like, right? After the initial excitement, after the initial burst, after the initial awesomeness, it should just be all awesome. But it's not. Here's Paul's own account of what happened next. This is from 2 Corinthians 11. Paul says, 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure, and apart from all the other things, there's the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all of the churches. He says, who's weak and I'm not weak? Who's made to fall and I'm not indignant? Indignant means angry at what I perceive to be unfair treatment. Paul goes, it feels like in my life sometimes I'm literally made to fall and to fail. And it makes me angry. See, there were moments where Paul wanted to give up. There were moments when Paul for sure wanted to shout angrily at God. 8 years in a cave? What about my purpose-driven life, God? What happened to that? 8 years. Paul says, of course I wanted to quit, but I didn't. Instead, he traveled all over the known world, starting churches every single place he went. You know, the best picture, if you want to picture the life of Paul, it's not a classroom, it's a mountain range. These are the Taurus Mountains in Turkey, mountains that Paul climbed to get from place to place. Taurus, just like Ford Taurus, by the way, I figured this out doing research. I'm not sure why Ford chose to name this car after a mountain range. Not a lot of resemblance there, but I don't know. They were shooting for it. So good job, Ford. Now we know why it's no longer made. Okay. Now, after all these hardships, all this difficulty, all this pain, all this turmoil, somehow Paul did not quit. In 2 Corinthians, that same letter, he wrote, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. How? How would you have resilience? How would you find the power to overcome pain and difficulty? Well, the answer of the world right now is you fix your eyes on your problems. You focus on them. You think about them. You obsess about them. You talk about them. You work on them. You find the power from within. But the problem is, whatever you stare at is what you become. And so if you stare at the problems and the pain in your life, friend, your life will become nothing but a series of pain and problems. That's not what Paul did. There's no verse in the Bible we can find that remotely sounds like the best advice is to focus on your pain and your problems. Think about that all the time. There's no recording in the book of Acts where Paul sits down and has a long thought about the pain of the 8 years in the cave and what that did to him. No, it doesn't happen. See, instead, what Paul did is he fixed his eyes on one thing, the end. And at the end, what he saw was Jesus standing right across the finish line. If there's a finish line to life, Jesus is right here. And what Paul imagined in his mind's eye was Jesus standing there cheering him on, and Paul crossing that finish line in full stride on his feet. See, Jesus is the end. I don't know if you've ever connected these dots before. There's a verse in Hebrews 12 that says, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith. So Jesus is the one we're supposed to fix our eyes on. One of the names for Jesus comes from Revelation 21, where he says, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. See, when you fix your eyes on Jesus, you're fixing your eyes on the end. When Paul's sitting in his prison cell and he's waiting for the end to come, and he's imagining the end to come, and the end finally comes, and he smiles and he laughs, it's because Jesus had arrived. He had done it. And when he writes this letter to Paul, or he writes this letter to Timothy, he writes about the end. Now, it's kind of an abstract thing to think about, right? Somewhat depressing. And so Paul gives three pictures to Timothy that actually show up across all of his other letters. They're powerful portraits of what it means to have power that lasts, to have resilience. We're going to go through each of them with the remainder of the time that we have. And one of them, I believe, is for you today. As I talk through, I want you to capture the one that's for you. I want you to burn it in your mind. I want you to have a conversation with God about these images. Paul writes about them in 2 Timothy 2. He says, no one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. And if anyone competes in athletics, he is not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. The hardworking farmer must be first to partake of the crops. Consider what I say, and may the Lord give you understanding in all things. He talks about the soldier, the farmer, and the athlete, Paul's all-time top three metaphors. Let's look at the farmer first. Who is the farmer? What's the power the farmer has? Well, the power of the farmer is the power to fix your eyes on the harvest in the Lord of the harvest and have the power to work and wait while nothing is happening. See, the secret of the farmer is the farmer gets up every single morning, works hard, waters the field, tills, fertilizes, and just has to wait. See, for most of the time, nothing's happening. There's no sign that it's working. There's nothing above the ground. It's just hoping and praying and waiting. The farmer has the patience to not give up. In Galatians 6, Paul said, a man reaps what he sows. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. The key trait of a farmer is they don't give up. They don't give up. Maybe you're in a season where you've been tempted to give up. I don't know on what, but you're tempted to give up. If so, fix the image of the farmer in your mind and ask God to give you the power that only He can to have the mindset of the farmer. Next is the soldier. The soldier fixes their eyes on victory in the commander of the angel armies. And because of that, they find the power to follow commands. Paul wrote, no one engaged in warfare entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him who enlisted him as a soldier. So the soldier trains and drills and battles and follows commands in order that he might please the person who has been enlisting him. This is the picture that God gave me years and years and years ago when I first entered into ministry. Before professional ministry, I'm talking the point where I just said to God, God, I want you to have my life. I want you to steer my steps. I see in the Bible that you have good works prepared for me. I don't know what those are, but I want to follow. I want to experience all of them. And at that time in my life, God gave me this picture of the soldier from another one of Paul's writings, Ephesians 6. Paul wrote, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. In ministry since then, there's been many times when I've wanted to quit. During COVID, it was hard, man. If you led anything in COVID, oh my gosh, you deserve a vacation. It was horrible, awful. There's days and weeks and months where it felt like anything I did was wrong. Everything I did would lose. There was turmoil inside. There was turmoil outside. It was just awful. And many days I'd hear that voice whisper me and say, Kyle, is this worth it? You don't have to do this. You could probably get a different job somewhere else, maybe even making more money. It'd be great. Why are you putting up with this? And to be honest, a massive part of the reason I did not quit is because of this image that was burned in my mind 20 years ago of wanting to be the soldier who pleases his commanding officer and gets the end of his life on his feet, having stood. I always imagine this as this old soldier, battle-scarred, weary, but still standing, ready for what's next or ready to be called home. That's the soldier. Now, the key trait is the soldier doesn't live to please himself. The soldier lives to please their commanding officer. And so my question to you with the soldier is, are you living to please yourself? If you are, that's why there's a gap of power in your life. See, the soldier fixes their eyes on God and lives to please him and him alone. If that's you, ask God to burn the picture of the soldier into your heart, into your mind. The last is the athlete. The athlete, they fix their eyes on the prize, on what the Bible calls the champion of our faith, Jesus. And they have the power, because of that, to train and to endure. Paul said if anyone competes in athletics, he's not crowned unless he competes according to the rules. Now, speaking of athletics, the Olympics are coming up again. Very excited about that. Paris 24, excited. Can't wait for the Olympics. Now, I would be excited a little bit more if they would do my idea, which I don't want to brag, but I do think this is the best idea I've ever had in my entire life. We'll see if you agree. And if you have a contact at CBS, NBC, whatever, you can share this idea with them free of charge. You're welcome for it, okay? This is what I want. When you watch the Olympics, you know you're watching the world's top athletes, right? They're amazing. They're incredible. And you know that they're so much stronger and faster and more talented than us, but we don't know how much stronger and how much faster and how much more talented than us. But I have a solution. I would like an average guy lane added to each and every event. That is what I want. Now, the person cannot be prepared. It can't be that, because that's not average. None of us are prepared to run a marathon, you know what I mean? So it's got to work like this. Loudspeaker comes on and goes, Daryl, section 307. Daryl, are you there, Daryl? And Daryl's sitting there. Daryl's 2.5 Mick Ultras in, shoving nachos into his face. They go, Daryl, we need you down in the field for the 800 right now. That's what I want. It'd be amazing. We're thinking about the high dive, right? The high dive's like 9 stories tall. Can you imagine calling somebody up there? If that was me, I would build a house and live there. I would not be jumping off. It'd be amazing. That'd be incredible TV. Incredible. Now, the point of all that is this. There is a massive difference between us and Olympic athletes. Of course there is. In fact, I don't mean to have low self-esteem, but I do want to be honest with you guys. I don't think I'm going to make the Olympics this year. I don't. I work out, 2, 3, sometimes 4 days a week, and I drink Diet Coke and sometimes light beer. I made friends with a vegan for health reasons, just trying to take care of myself like you guys. I don't think I'm going to make the Olympics. In fact, I'll bet when you watch the Olympics this summer and we're seeing these videos play, which they always play, little bios, 5-minute little bio picture about what these people were like when they were kids and their parents are interviewed and their coaches and all that stuff. You probably won't watch any of those where it goes like this. Yeah, Johnny just was kind of lazy and sat on the couch all day, and we have no idea how he made the Olympics. That's not going to happen. No one accidentally gets to the Olympics. No one accidentally wins the race. The only way you do it is you enter into strict training. That's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 9. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. My question, if you would allow me, if I could just poke you just a little bit, my question would be, is there anything in your life that looks like strict training when it comes to you and God? Is there anything in your life that your neighbors would go like, man, I don't understand why every single day Dan does that? Is there anything in your life? If there's not, I just want to warn you, don't be surprised if you don't finish the race. The only way to finish is to train. Maybe in your life you have a moment of conviction, hearing that about the athlete, a moment of conviction about training. If so, fix the image of the athlete in your mind and ask God to give you the power to be like the athlete. Now, all 3 of them have the same idea, same big idea, right? Fix your eyes on the end and let that vision of the end drive how you act and behave today. All of them are the same exact way. This is Paul's secret. This is how Paul goes all over the known world and overcomes obstacles that would set so many of us back and overcomes disappointments again and again and again and again. As he said, God, would you form the image in my mind? I want to finish well. Friends, I'm just asking you in your life, what would it change if today you adopted the vision of finishing well? What would change in your life if you said, God, I want to be the athlete. Focus my mind, focus my attention on the prize. I want to be the soldier who just wants to be victorious, and I know the only way to do that is to wake up and please you every single day. What would change in your life if you were the farmer focused on the harvest, praying to the Lord of the harvest to give you the patience to wait, to keep praying for them, to keep standing in the gap, to not move, to not quit? What would change? I want to be really clear at this point. This is not a self-help message. This is not a work up the power to get up every day and just be super disciplined yourself and do it all on your own. You and I cannot do any of these pictures. We can't. It's impossible for us. But the good news is that Jesus promised the same power that raised Christ from the dead is available to us. And that's what we see. That's the story of Paul. He's just a guy. He's a guy who experiences so many setbacks, and he gets up and he keeps going because the power of the living God was in him, and it can be in you too. It can. I don't know where you are. Maybe you're in a spot where you hear that and you're like, Kyle, it's too late. I already gave up. I gave up years ago. What do you mean, man? This message would have been really helpful 15 years ago. Guess what? You're not at the end yet. You can get back up. You can. You can stand up. It doesn't have to be the end for you. You can keep on going. God has more for you. And before we leave, we're almost done. I know you're getting that itch to stand up and get to your car and beat the traffic. Just crush it down for just a second. I want to do an exercise. This is no good if it's just an interesting message and we walk out. This has to be burned and go from our mind into our hearts. I want you to close your eyes right now. Close your eyes. Let one of those images pop into your mind. The soldier, farmer, the athlete. Whichever one's stuck in there right now, I want you to have a conversation with God before you leave. If there's something you want to repent from, maybe it's for not waiting, not training. You can do that and just say, God, I'm sorry. It wasn't my intention. Would you forgive me? And his answer is always yes. He does. Good news, he does. Now I want you to ask God to fix the image in your mind and to give you the power that only he can to end well, to see the harvest, to see victory, to get the crown and win the race. Let me pray for you. God, thank you for the power of Paul's words, the example of his experience. Thank you for the pictures that he gives. And God, I ask for all of us that you'd give us the power that goes beyond our ability to run our race well, to finish well, God. We want to be resilient. We don't want to be the church that's a flash in the pan. We don't want to be an amazing 28 years and nothing after, God. We want more than that. Would you give us the power to last? Amen.